In Canada, the population is growing at breakneck pace. You must have followed news of a population crisis hitting several countries. South Korea and Japan are the worst hit. China is getting in that club too. But Canada is defying the trend. Its population increased by over 1 million people last year alone. It's not like Canadians are having more babies. That's far from it. Canada's population growth is being driven by immigrants. Because the government is actively encouraging immigration, it is setting higher targets for itself. And this could prove to be a double-edged sword. Our next report explains.
The Canada that we know of today is essentially a country of immigrants, colonizers to be precise. Before the arrival of European colonizers, Canada had a population of about 500,000 indigenous people. But European colonialism brought about a drastic change in Canada. The indigenous population fell from anywhere between 40 to 80%. Today, another wave of immigration is leading to a spike in Canada's population. This is part of the Canadian government's plan to increase the population. Last year, Canada's population grew by 2.7%. This is the fastest population expansion among advanced economies and puts Canada at par with many African nations. The country's population rose by over 1 million people, the highest ever recorded rise in the country's history. Canada now stands on the cusp of having a population of 40 million people. According to Statistics Canada, if the current trends hold, its population will double in the next 26 years. People from around the world are rushing to Canada. It's the lure of living in a developed Western nation, greener pastures, as they say. International migration accounted for 95.9% of the country's population growth last year. And some countries stood out, countries like India, China, and Afghanistan. Indians made up 27% of the total immigrants that Canada took in last year. The Chinese were a distant second, making up 7.2%. Then came the Afghans at 5.4%. The growth in Canada's population comes at a time when its government has made immigration a priority. And while most governments would like to curb the number of immigrants they take in, Canada is doing quite the opposite. It's encouraging immigration, and how? The Canadian government wants to be able to process and accept 500,000 immigration applications every year by 2025. So immigrants actually have the government of Canada standing behind them. Why is that? Canada faces a host of challenges. This includes high job vacancies and labor shortages. And Canada's existing population is aging fast. Unemployment is at a near record low, which means there's a strong demand for jobs. Labor shortages can be a critical threat to any country's economy. And Canada wants to avoid that threat by a mile. But that doesn't mean all is well, even now. In the last quarter of 2022, Canada's economy stalled and recorded no growth. That was described as a massive underperformance, one which nobody saw coming. There's a reason why many countries have tough immigration rules. Rampant immigration can change a country forever. It has the potential to alter the makeup of a nation's society. But from a more economic point of view, rising population alone can put governments in a tricky position. An influx of immigrants can create challenges in many sectors. Canada must make sure there are houses for the new immigrants, that they have access to healthcare, and that the country's infrastructure can support a rampantly rising population. There's not much Canada is doing on these fronts, but the population is rising, and it's rising fast. But the million-dollar question is, will the population boost lead to an economic boom?